Okay, we're talking now about a summary with Unit 19, Planning, Zoning, Environmental Hazards. Once again, remember this is just a summary. We don't do the full chapter, just going over the high points. A little bit of history about the evolution of land use planning in Florida. Before the rules came out, it was basically a philosophy of laissez-faire, which is do whatever you want without government interference. Talking about the whole of the states in 1916, New York brought out some rules to protect Fifth Avenue from the garment industry. And in 1926, Supreme Court said it was constitutional. In Florida, we brought out the Florida Growth Management Act of 1972. And it allows local governments to provide standards and funds for growth, and concurrency provisions mandates that infrastructure needs to grow to support development before it's in place, before the development is allowed. We also have the Florida Growth Policy and Community Planning Act, and we'll talk about more of this in the class, but basically it manages future development and protects traditional industries. We also have a concurrency requirement that sanitary sewers, solid waste, drainage, potable water has to be in operation and in place before we can expand into subdivisions, for instance. But they did eliminate concurrency for transportation facilities, schools, and parks and recreation. And it's usually implemented with a comprehensive 10-year plan. I'll show you an example in class. Florida's Growth Policy and Community Planning Act once again provides for the concurrency provision of the facilities that have got to be in place before development can begin. And the Community Planning Act places growth planning responsibilities with the local communities to establish comprehensive plans. The planning goals are, for instance, to save taxpayers money, to provide for adequate services, to provide for rights of way and setbacks, and to protect against the natural destroying of drainage and prevent flooding, and also to reduce problems associated with landfills or prisons, etc., on the local populace. The composition of the Planning Commission is a diverse group. They're appointed, not elected, and they're voluntary, unpaid, and advisory body to the elected officials of the city or the county. And the authority of the Planning Commission is essentially subdivision plat approval and any non-subdivision site plan approval, and also some control over the signs, billboards, and so forth. And they are given support by the support staff of the Commission, and these are planners, county employees. One of the things we may be wanting to do when we're assisting maybe an investor developing an area is how many lots per acre based on the zoning. For instance, we've got an example coming up here. Just remember that 43,560 square feet in 1 acre. We have a tract of 100 acres. And zoning says we have to have 9,000 square feet per lot, and 25% of that must be set aside for streets and sidewalks, or that's what the developer determines. So what we would do is work out exactly how many square feet per acre would be available, and then we multiply that by how many acres we have, and then we divide that by the number of square feet per lot, which comes out about 363. That's one of the questions in the book. We have another example here that we have a tract of 20 acres and we have to have 12,000 square feet per lot. We do set aside 10% for streets and sidewalks, plus we also have an entry road of 500 feet by 30 feet. And the lots, as we said, was 12,000 square feet each. So first of all, we work out how much available land is available for lots. It's 39,000. Then we multiply that by 20 acres. But then what we have to do is we have to take off the 15,000 square feet for the road, which gives us the 769,080 buildable square feet for lots. Divide that by 12,000 and we'll come up with about 64. We come across zoning all the time. Zoning is how the local government determines exactly what should go where and how it is used. So it is an exercise of police power, and it regulates the permissible uses of land, also the lot size, the types of structures that are allowed on the lot, any building heights, how many stories, setback requirements, the distance between the edge of the building and the lot boundary, and also the density, how many homes per acre, etc. Here's an example of a zoning map. I'm not going to go into it too much, but every city, every county has one, and they're all different with different codes and what have you. Then we have residential zoning, which regulates densities, and we do have different subcategories to establish minimum lot size and also limit the number of units per acre. Also determines how many units can be in one lot, maybe a simplex or a duplex or a quadruplex, fourplex. Here's a blown up version once again of a zoning map. We have other zoning classifications. Commercial zoning, which regulates intensity, which is the traffic. We will have in between various zoning categories some strips of land or actual different categories to separate one zoning from another. Like a buffer zone, we call that strip of land separating one use from another. We also have industrial categories, which also regulates intensity. Agriculture, we don't have any subcategories on agriculture. It's either agriculture or it's not. It can be used for single-family residence as well. And then we have special use, which isn't zoned at all. It's just for government properties and government usage. We have building codes on how we actually build the homes, to what quality and what materials. So here's an example to protect public health and safety from inferior construction practices. Minimum standards for materials and quality of workmanship, sanitary equipment, electrical wiring, fire prevention. We also talk about the statewide Florida Building Code, which regulates R values, which is the insulation values we find in homes, the wind loads that buildings must be able to cope with in the case of high winds. And these codes are enforced by local governments through the use of building permits and building inspections, and then finally, when everything is okay, certificates of occupancy. If you don't like the zoning, or the zoning is causing a problem, we have ways of dealing with this, possibly. We have types of appeals and requests for relief. The first one is a variance. Variance permits minor deviation from existing zoning rules to allow you to go ahead with your project. It has to be hardship related to land use. That means that it isn't necessarily something caused by you. It's just that the land isn't really suited for what you want to do to a minor degree. And the board does have established criteria by sorting this out for you. We can grant a special exception, separate use for a specific parcel outside the normal zoning codes. We also have legally non-conforming use, where I was legally zoned, but now the zoning has changed around me, and therefore I no longer conform, so can I be grandfathered in with my present use until such time as the property changes hands, or a specific amount of time, or other terms. Here's an example of a variance. Maybe I have a triangular piece of land and the property zoning says I have to have a setback of 20 feet, but I want to build a certain size building and I'm only allowed 15 feet on the corners. Can I still go ahead and do that? And they may grant me a variance. Whereas a non-conforming use, I was okay for maybe a residential property. Now it's been confirmed or zoned into light commercial or business. And I still want to stay there. I don't think that property there is going to stay there much longer. If we do build a big structure like a mall or a sports stadium or entertainment complex, we will probably come under the rules of a development of regional impact study. Any development that, because of the character, size or location, that will have a substantial effect on health and safety or welfare of citizens of more than one county, may be subject to a DRI. Statewide guidelines and standards fall in, and also shopping centres, malls, attraction and sports facilities are the sort of places that may come under it. Here's an example of the UTC. We also have a planned development unit. which is sort of special use zoning, so we can cluster homes together. We've got a higher density with large green spaces between clusters, and we may also have mixed land use. We may have single-family homes, multi-family housing, or townhouses and apartments, and we may even have some retail and office facilities. They come in all various shapes and sizes, and they have lots of planned open spaces. Here's an example of what a planned unit development may look like, where you've got a lot of green space. Maybe the bottom floors are retail outlets and the top floors are condominiums and so forth. We do have a National Flood Insurance Program. This is available to owners and tenants and businesses if community participates. That means the actual community in which you are, the local government community, has to abide by the rules with regards planning and drainage and building codes and so forth. It is administered by FEMA. Insurance is available for properties located only in special flood hazard areas. And the special flood hazard area is a 100-year floodplain. You've got a 26% chance for flooding during a 30-year loan. In other words, they expect it to flood maybe once every 100 years. Here's an example of all of our special flood hazard areas around where we are. There's quite a few of them. CERCLA, which is a Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, and it is about having the ability to respond to release of hazardous substances and also determining what clear-up is necessary on older sites. So the liability of cleanup is we're talking about here, established a super fund, this is EPA run, to finance emergency responses and cleanup costs. Super fund is financed by taxes on petroleum and chemical companies. The program is administered by the EPA. It protects the health and environment of people around and identifies and forces responsible parties to reimburse or pay for the government cleanup costs. And the procedures are laid out in the National Contingency Plan. We do have some Superfund sites in Florida, and here they are. We'll go into that later on. And basically what they do is they find the potentially responsible persons, and it can be present persons or past persons, and they're liable for the cleanup costs. It is strict. That means they have to pay either singly or jointly, and it can go back to the previous owners and the people who delivered the materials and the people who actually provided the materials. If you can show that when you bought the property you did everything to make sure that the land was clean, you may have immunity. And some sites are put on the national priorities list. Talking about the potential responsible persons, they have to be liable for responsible parties, present owners and operators, or past owners and operators of site when the hazardous substances were on the site, and the generators of the hazardous substances that were actually put on the site, and the transporters that actually transported the hazardous substances to the site. All can be held responsible to some degree. And we say strict liability. That means potential responsible persons will be held liable, and any one person or group of people may be held responsible for all of the cleanup costs. We have the innocent landowner defense. Pollution was caused by a third party, someone other than the current owner, and the owner did not know the property was contaminated, and it reacted responsibly upon discovery of the contamination, and did make reasonable inquiries or inspections before purchase, and did the due diligence. Then the agent may be responsible for the negligence if the agent was aware of it and didn't pass it on. And we do have a national priorities list which is maintained by the EPA. Lists of the sites that warrant remedial action and determine which sites warrant further investigation, identify what circular finance remedial actions may be appropriate, and then notify the public of sites the EPA believes warrant further investigation, and notify potential responsible parties that the EPA may initiate circular finance remediation. This is used for most serious long-term cleanup sites. If placed on the list, then it will be eligible for super funds from the EPA Trust Fund. When we are selling or renting property, we do need to be aware that there may be asbestos in buildings prior to 78. Can be used as insulation or fire retardant, can be used on roofs, sidings. There are federal state regulations which licenses and regulates asbestos contractors and consultants. And they also regulate how to work with asbestos on more than 1 to 4 units. And the EPA recommends a phase 1 assessment on any potentially hazardous property which shows sign of deterioration, encapsulation versus removal. And when we actually have a sale, we usually get the seller to sign this disclosure. It's not in the contract, but it's on the seller's disclosure. And here we talk about lead-based paint and asbestos and mold and radon gas and methamphetamine and other products. Radon gas is not so much a problem in Florida. There are areas where it can be a little bit, usually north of the Manatee River and down in Dade County. All that's required on the offer contract is the disclosure. Nobody is required to do anything about it unless they want to. We also have a lead-based paint. Applies to housing built before 1978, only on residential homes. No testing is required, only disclosure on the sales contract. You are required to give potential buyers this form, which is a booklet rather, and this also gives them the option to have 10 days to conduct testing and to turn down the contract. The seller must disclose known lead-based paint hazards and hand those over to the buyer when asked, and any details that the any inspections, lead-based paint inspections and so forth, handing it over. And it's up to the listing agent to make sure that they make the seller aware of the responsibilities and sign for it. Also, on landlords and leases, you give the tenant this pamphlet and disclose any known lead-based paint hazards. And you are required to actually retain this documentation for 3 years. There are some exceptions which we don't really cover too much in the book, but I'll just tell you any building built after 1977, commercial facilities, any 0-bedroom units or leases for less than 100 days, if it's 62 plus or 55 plus or handicapped, then it's not necessary as long as there's no children under the age of 6 living there. And if you have an older home which has been certified lead-free, foreclosures and lease renewals with existing tenants then are not under this law. Mold, we are just required to say there may be mold present, and it's up to you to, as a buyer, to check it. Usually you find it after water damage. Remediators must be licensed as mold remediators by the DPPR. Can be an expensive project. Sinkholes, we do have sinkholes north of the river, as you can see by the chart there. The seller must disclose any claims and whether they've been paid and what work has been done, and use a sinkhole disclosure. Some agents use them all the time, others only in sinkhole areas. And there's a disclosure there. We also have a sinkhole disclosure on the seller's disclosure form. And water supply can be contaminated by hazardous waste, storage tanks, agricultural runoff, especially in rural properties where you have an outside well or cistern. So most certainly you have to have wells tested if you're involved in the sale or purchase of a rural property with an outside well, a non-public water source. One we do have a lot down here is wood-destroying organisms, namely termites. A licensed professional, when a fee is charged, has to be licensed. The person inspecting or report is given. Must be done in accordance with the rules. Note any bugs found, area accessed or not accessed, and any damage found, old or new. Report the type of insects found. If you do spray, name of pesticide used. And you place a notice easily found under the sink or next to the air conditioner or something like that. records to be kept for 3 years. And the inspector must not have any interest or ownership in the home when inspecting. And that's the end of chapter 19, and that's the end of the book. Thanks very much for going through this set of slides. Please remember these are very, very brief summaries for use before you actually get into the chapter in class or as a refresher after class, and they're not part of any approved course. They are purely a free addition from me personally to you when you're taking my class. Thank you very much and hope you pass. Thanks. Bye-bye.